Hello, my name is Ali Cork. I'm a member of Rural Australians for Refugees, and I founded the branch here in Apollo Bay, where I live. I'm very lucky to live here. I've been asked to speak to you for 2 minutes on issues surrounding the Tampa affair, which happened 20 years ago. And I've made some notes, so you have to excuse me if I have a little peep from time to time. Fear is good. A little fear is good, apparently, because it sharpens our reflexes with an adrenaline surge that can help us run away and defend ourselves. But there's another sort of fear that I want to mention today, and this is a nasty, insidious kind of fear. It's the fear we've been told to have of something the government has chosen. And I'm talking here about refugees and asylum seekers, people who through no fault of their own have lost everything: their country, their home, their peaceful lives, and heartbreakingly their families. People who've had to move in an instant from living a life they knew and loved, like we are today, to living in a war zone surrounded by death, destruction, and the sort of fear we can barely imagine. Not only am I not frightened of refugees, I empathise with their plight, and I'll do everything in my power to help them. And in my experience, certainly the people watching this video today, I hope, most people feel the same way I do. We want to welcome refugees. We want to help people who've lost everything to heal and to start over. And if we do this, we could once again be proud to call ourselves Australians. Now, I'm not sure when the government used a base fear or a base emotion like fear to influence our hearts and our minds, and most importantly, our votes. Some people say it started with the Tampa affair, which, as I mentioned, was 20 years ago, when John Howard sent the SAS, elite soldiers, to deal with 400 dehydrated, sick and terrified refugees, whose only crime was to dare to seek safety in Australia. What a shameful debacle that was, only eclipsed by the children overboard lie, and it was followed by subsequent attempts to demonise all asylum seekers. Today it's time to call them out. Listen up, politicians. We're not afraid of refugees. We detest your treatment of them, all of them, including those you've incarcerated for 8 years on Manus, Nauru, and in onshore detention centres and hotels. We know them, we hear them, and we're trying so hard to help them. Years ago, my daughter wrote a poem about fear that still resonates. I'll share a few lines with you. Fear stalks the fearful, eliminates the brave, turns heroes into cowards and haunts them to their grave. Waiting at the corner, hiding by the gate, fear with its cronies, envy, greed and hate. I'm not frightened of refugees, but I'm terrified of what, under this government, we are becoming. Thank you.
Hello, my name's David, and 20 years ago I worked for the famous Norwegian shipping line, Wilhelmsen Lines. Wilhelmsen Lines had run ships to Australia for over 150 years and were the owners of the very large ship, the Tampa. The Tampa is nearly 300 metres long and operated on a round-the-world service that took the ship from Europe through Panama, down to Australia, back through Asia, through Panama, USA, and back to Europe. In August 2001, it happened to be on the way from Australia to Singapore, and on the way it picked up a distress call broadcast by Australian authorities about a ship called the Palapa, which was in distress and had about 80 people on board displaying rescue signals, SOS, help, and so on. On board, the captain was Captain Arne Rinnan, a lifelong captain in the company, and he immediately altered course and picked these people up a few hours later. That was the beginning of the so-called Tampa incident. Now I should put this in context. Wilhelmsen Lines, being a long-term ship owner, 150 years history, had a long record of observing a tradition of saving lives at sea. This tradition still applies, and in fact Williamson Lines had picked up over 1,000 people, just as an example, during the Vietnam boat people crisis. So the captain didn't hesitate, and he immediately took on board all the people from the Palapa, which was at that time sinking. Now, the authorities had alerted him to 80 being on board. It turned out there were 438. His intention was to continue to Singapore, but after a lot of discussion with the refugees, he decided to divert to Christmas Island in their interests and in the interests of his own ship and crew. Christmas Island is thousands of kilometres from Australia and actually closer to Indonesia, but it is Australian territory. When the captain got there, he was refused permission to enter port, and that began quite a standoff that culminated some days later, after a lot of politics, and even the SAS actually landing on board the ship, in the ship discharging the people and them being handed over to Australian authorities. Now, I don't pretend that I had any particular involvement in this, but I was, like most employees in the company, very proud of the fact that we had observed the traditions of life at sea. This led to me in 2002, just as a representative of the company, not because I'd done anything, accepting an award in New York on behalf of the company for its humanitarian efforts. Captain Rinnan was also rewarded and in fact got a UN humanitarian award, and he was supported, I'm very proud to say, from the board down to the last employee. I never ever heard anyone criticise the decisions he took or the decision to pick these people up and rescue them. I'm happy to say that that's still the view of the company, I believe, even though I have now retired, and is still the overwhelming opinion of people who serve at sea. So that was a very good effort by the company, in my opinion, and the right decisions were made. The politics were intense. The publicity was unbelievable. It's not often that the Australia gets in the news in the United States, but it was news every day. And behind me on the wall here, you can see a collection of cartoons. These are all originals. They appeared in the Australian day after day. They're by the famous cartoonist Peter Nicholson, and I hung them in my office in the United States, and they attracted great interest. Let's hope that these traditions continue, and that people who get into trouble are treated in a humane fashion. That's it. Thank you. Bye.
In August 2001, the Norwegian cargo ship Tampa, at the request of the Australian government, rescued a few hundred-odd asylum seekers whose boat had foundered on its way to Australia. 2 days later, on 26 August 2001, the Tampa tried to enter Australian territorial waters because some of the rescued asylum seekers needed medical help. The Australian government ordered the Tampa not to enter Australian territorial waters, and despite that order, the captain of Tampa took the boat into Australian territorial waters off Christmas Island, and thus began the standoff, because the Australian government sent out the SAS, who took control of the bridge at gunpoint. The matter ended up in the federal court, and the trial judge in the Federal Court of Australia gave judgment in favour of the asylum seekers at 2:15 in the afternoon Melbourne time on the 11th of September 2001, just hours before the terrorist attack on America. After the terrorist attack on America, Australia's policy towards people seeking asylum in this country changed profoundly. Since that date, the treatment of asylum seekers in Australia has been appalling. They were put into detention centres, sometimes for years on end. In fact, there are people in detention right now who've been in detention for over 10 years. And someone did a calculation back at the time of Tampa or shortly afterwards that if every boat person who arrived in Australia seeking asylum was handed $1 million in cash and told to go and spend it somewhere else, we would have saved money. That's insane. It would be terrible policy, but it shows how insanely the government is throwing taxpayer dollars at the idea of locking up people who have committed no offence and who are simply seeking protection from persecution in Australia.
My name's Louise Redmond. I'm National President of Rural Australians for Refugees. Our group started 20 years ago, and now we have over 80 groups through all states of Australia. This means there are thousands of people in rural and regional areas who actively support and care for people seeking refuge in our country, fleeing persecution and war. The ways that our groups help are things like finding jobs, and this can mean finding accommodation and supporting people until they get on their feet. Our groups offer friendship. We run English classes and help people learn Australian ways. Many of our groups raise money to help people going through tough times, paying the rent and buying food when they've lost their jobs and have no income support. We speak out for refugees and call for fair government policies. We do this because we believe this is demonstrating real Australian values, values of compassion, care and a fair go for all. We also value the contribution that refugees bring to our communities. We reject fear. We reject cruelty. We reject the government policy of deterrence. The idea that you can lock people up for years without an end in sight as a way to stop others from coming seeking safety is abhorrent to us. We want refugees in our communities because of the qualities they bring. Qualities of resilience, courage, determination, and entrepreneurship. These are the qualities we need in rural and regional areas, and indeed in all of Australia. That's why our groups continue to support refugees and people seeking asylum.
My name is Thiet Hun, Vietnamese refugee. I left Vietnam in 1979 with my wife and two sons. We traveled by boat. In 5 days. We see the Thailand pirate 5 times, and they took everything. We haven't gotten enough food and water for drinking. But finally we arrived at Pulau Bidong, which belonged to Malaysia. We stayed in Pulau Bidong for half years, and we left Pulau Bidong the end of 79, and we arrived in Australia. We got accepted by Australian delegation. We are very happy to be accepted by Australian, and we arrived to Canberra, and we got a sponsor by the Church of Christ in Canberra. And we are very happy when we arrived to Australia. We got sponsored by the church, and now they help me to do looking for a job, and my wife to study English, and to my son go to school. And we very thank you to Australian. We accept my family. We very, very happy family. Thank you.